Right, now let's talk about other news, and that being the founding of Corruption Watch occurring 10 years ago. We speak to Professor Mzukisi Qobo, Acting Chair at Corruption Watch. A very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us. You released a report last year in 2022 to reflect on your achievements and the challenges you faced since your founding. But I'd like to perhaps start with your thoughts on the press briefing earlier on by the Justice Ministry and the NDPP earlier on the failure of the request for extradition for the Gupta brothers in the UAE. Any thoughts to share? Because some did frame it within the grander scheme of the fight against state capture in South Africa.
Thanks, SABC, for having me, and good evening to the viewers. It was indeed confounding to listen to both institutions setting out the failure to agree, for the UAE to accede to their extradition request. We were, as a nation, under the impression that a lot of work had been underway to secure the extradition of the Guptas back to South Africa to face justice. So the latest developments are indeed perplexing, and there isn't much detail offered for us to make an informed view of what might have led to the breakdown of understanding between the two countries.
So I want you to reflect on this journey that you've traveled and basing it on your report, this 10-year anniversary of the Corruption Watch Index. You also mentioned that it coincided with the release of the 6-volume Zondo State Capture Commission report. But I think what people are looking at is whether or not we've made any substantive headway on fighting state capture. Are we better able to protect the state coffers having dealt with it this way? I mean, Shamila Batoy is saying earlier on, in response to a question on this, that there have been high-profile arrests and assets forfeiture, but does it seem like we're getting anywhere?
So I think credit to where it's due. I think the magnitude of the challenge are such that we find ourselves realizing, I think for the first time, that corruption is a monstrosity, that it had perhaps seeped deep into the institutions of our society, and that it is not something that could be slain at one go. I must say, however, that the process of implementing the Zondo Commission's report and recommendation is grinding very slowly, and there is impatience in society regarding the arrests that need to be made, and some individuals who were implicated by the Zondo Commission are working in the state. I'm not convinced that we are taking corruption with the seriousness that we should. There's been some work done. The NPA has been reinforced somewhat. There have been some arrests. Even the extradition request itself was a sort of a positive light on the horizon. But the process is moving very slow, and I suspect that acts of corruption are still continuing in the state at different levels.
The persistence of state capture, particularly within the South African dynamics, I know it occurs in other transition countries. Our SOEs have been fingered as the bedrock of this practice. And of course, it includes both the public and private players. But have we been able to better understand how to tackle it? If you look at the state organs that are meant to prosecute these crimes, that are supposed to investigate these crimes, do they have the requisite powers?
I think what we've seen over the last decade is a systematic erosion of state institutions, capabilities within the state, the law enforcement agencies, and an array of institutions that are supposedly designed to reinforce the rule of law, to fight criminality. And interestingly, our grey listing recently casts light on the weaknesses of some of these institutions and the failure of various institutions, public institutions, to coordinate and collaborate better. So you're quite correct in the implication of your question that these institutions are not robust by any stretch. There's a difference between the rhetoric, sort of the reform rhetoric, the anti-criminality rhetoric, anti-corruption rhetoric, and the teeth that these institutions have, which, in my view, is blunt.
And just very quickly, some have pointed to the fact that in all of this discussion, we are also not dealing head on with the incentives to be involved in state capture. Do we have the capacity to, dissuade those who actively get those who are at a public level to be involved in such corrupt practices, the grand scale of corruption?
It's a tough question. I think the corruption is metastasized. I think during the Zuma era, there were a set of actors that we could paint as corrupt, and a group of people we thought were angels. And I think what we've learned is that corruption has metastasized across public institutions. It's not often coordinated. It's far more diffused than we imagine, and I think there are incentives to be corrupt, because those who are at the apex of grand corruption are still walking among us. They are brazen. They feel that the law is weak to get hold of them, and those at lower levels are therefore emboldened to continue, as long as we don't see a seriousness in the law enforcement agencies, or at least great results with people arrested, put behind bars, and for reasons that I mentioned earlier, that these institutions' capabilities have been eroded over time.
Thank you so much for your time and just sharing with us the journey of the inception of the Corruption Watch Index, that anniversary being celebrated last year in 2022. Professor Mzukisi Qobo, acting chair at Corruption Watch, also speaking to us about the current state of state capture and efforts to end it.